Okay, chapter 6. After the terrifying night, the bright morning sun was a welcome sight. Okay, so after the terrifying night, because remember, our last chapter we read that the mountain lion was trying to, just stalk them and try to probably eat them for dinner, honestly. So after a terrifying night, when they saw the bright morning sun, they were just like, oh, what a relief. I fixed breakfast and soon we were on our way. So he made breakfast for everybody and then they headed out. I tried to get the pups to follow me so as to lighten my load. So he tried to get them to walk instead of him having to carry them because he was so tired from carrying them. They would for a way, and then sitting down on their rears, they would cry and whimper. So they would walk for a little bit and then they would stop, sit down, and start crying and whimpering. Back in the sack they would go, with their heads sticking out of the holes and their long ears flopping. I moved on. About midday, I entered country I knew. I wasn't far from home. I dropped down out of the mountains into the bottoms, far above the place I had crossed the river on my way to town. Staying on the left of the river, I followed its course past several campgrounds, but didn't stop until I came to the one where I found the magazine. So all the campgrounds are the places where the fishermen would come to camp out and to fish. And so he's saying that he just kept going until he went to the one where he found the magazine for the first time, the one that had the ad in it for the puppies. Here I took the pups out of the sack and sat down in the warm sand. As the afternoon wore on, I sat there deep in thought. I was trying to think of what I was going to tell my mother and father. I could think of nothing. Finally, I decided I would just tell them the truth, and with the help of the new overalls, cloth, and candy, I would weather the storm. So weathering the storm means he would get through the hard times of, because the storm was his parents being mad at him, his sisters being upset that he was just gone and didn't tell anyone. But he says he would weather the storm. That means he would get through it because they would be upset, but then they would be excited for all the goodies he bought them. My pups were having a big time playing. They were having a good time playing. With their little front paws locked around each other, they were growling, rolling, and chewing on one another. They looked so cute. I laughed out loud. While I was watching their romping, the thought came, I haven't named them. Oh, he hasn't picked names for them yet. I went over the list of names. For him, I tried Red, Bugle, Lead, name after name as before. For her, I tried Susie, Mabel, Queen, all kinds of girl names. None seemed to fit. Still mumbling names over and over, I glanced up. There, carved in the white bark of a sycamore tree, was a large heart. In the center of the heart were two names, Dan and Anne. The name Dan was a little larger than Anne. It was wide and bold. The scar stood out more. The name Anne was small and neat and even. I stared unbelieving, for there were my names. They were perfect. Okay, so he saw that someone had carved into the bark of a tree, probably with a knife, a big heart, and inside of it said Dan and Anne, and he thought, those names are perfect for my dogs. I walked over and picked up my pups. Looking at him, I said, your name is Dan. I'll call you Old Dan. Looking at her, I said, your name, little girl, is Anne. I'll call you Little Anne. It was then I realized it was all too perfect. Here in this fisherman's camp, I had found the magazine and the ad. I looked over at the old sycamore log. There I had asked God to help me get 2 hound pups. There were the pups rolling and playing in the warm sand. I thought of the old Casey baking powder can and the fishermen, how freely they had given their nickels and dimes. I looked up again at the names carved in the tree. Yes, it was all there like a large puzzle. Piece by piece, each fit perfectly until the puzzle was complete. It could not have happened without the help of an unseen power. He thinks God helped him, and I think so too. That sounds like it's just too perfect. It played out way too perfect, and when things are perfect, it's probably God helping, more than likely. I stayed at the campground until dark. I knew I had to go home, but I put it off as long as I could. The crying of the pups telling me they were hungry made up my mind for me. So he was so close to home because he's right at the campground and his house is really close by. But he was so scared to go home because he knew everybody was upset with him that he was just trying to stay there as long as he could. But then the pups started crying because they were hungry, and he's like, okay, I have to go home so that they can eat. I knew the time had come for me to face my mother and father. I sacked up my dogs and waded the river. As I came out of the bottoms, I could see the lamplight glow from the windows of our home. One of the small yellow squares darkened for an instant. Someone had walked across the floor. I wondered who it was. I heard Daisy, our milk cow, moo. I was thinking so hard of what I would say. It startled me for a second. So he was thinking, oh, what do I say? He was looking at his house. He saw the yellow light on the square windows, and then one of them got dark, so that means someone passed by and blocked the lights. And then he heard Daisy moo while he was really thinking, and her moo scared him. Reaching the gate to our house, I stopped. I had never thought our home was pretty, but that night it looked different. It looked clean and neat and peaceful, nestled there in the foothills of the Ozarks. Yes, on that night I was proud of our home. My bare feet made no noise, as I crossed the porch. With my free hand, I reached and pulled the leather that worked the latch. Slowly, the door swung inward, so he opened the door to his home. I couldn't see my father or sisters. They were too far to the right of me, but my mother was directly in the front of the door, sitting in her old cane bottom rocker, knitting. So the first person he saw was his mom. She looked up. I saw all the worry and grief leave her eyes. Her head bowed down. The knitting in her hands came up to cover her face. I stepped inside the room. I wanted to run to her and comfort her and tell her how sorry I was for all the worry and grief I had caused her. The booming voice of my father shook me from my trance. He said, "Well, what have you got there?" Laughing, he got up from his chair and came over to me. He reached and took the sack from my shoulder. "When we started looking for you," he said, "I went to the store and your grandpa told me all about it. It wasn't too hard to figure out what you had done, but you should have told us." I ran to my mother, and dropping to my knees, I buried my face in her lap. As Mama patted my head, I heard her say in a quavering voice, "Oh, why didn't you tell us? Why?" I couldn't answer. Between sobs, I heard the squeals of delight from my sisters as they fondled my pups. So, Mama was sad because he didn't tell them, and Billy was feeling guilty, and Dad was just excited he was home, and the sisters were super excited just playing with the puppies. I heard my father say, "What's this other stuff you've got?" Without raising my head from Mother's lap, in a choking voice I said, "One is for you, one is for Mama, and the other's for the girls." I heard the snapping of string and the rattle of paper. The oohs and ahs from my sisters were wonderful to hear. So the sisters were really excited about that candy, so they started oohing and awing. Papa came over to Mama. Laying the cloth on the arm of her chair, he said, "Well, you've been wanting a new dress. Here's enough cloth to make half a dozen dresses." Realizing that everything was forgiven, I stood up and dried my eyes. Papa was pleased with his new overalls. My sisters forgot the pups for the candy. The light that was shining from my mother's eyes as she fingered the cheap cotton cloth was something I will never forget. So his mom was so excited, just looking at the cloth and rolling her fingers through it. And her eyes were so shiny and just so excited that Billy felt really excited that his mom was happy and that he made her happy. And he said he would never forget that feeling. Mama warmed some milk for the pups. They drank until their little tummies were tight and round. As I ate, Papa sat down at the table and started talking man talk to me. He said, "How are things in town?" I told him it was boiling with people. The wagon yard was full of wagons and teams. He asked if I'd seen anyone I knew. I told him I hadn't, but the station master had asked about him. He asked me where I spent the night. I told him about the cave in the Sparrowhawk Mountains. He said that must be the one called Robber's Cave. My youngest sister piped up. Did you stay all night with some robbers? My oldest sister said, silly, that was a long time ago. There aren't any robbers there now. The other one put her nickel's worth in. Weren't you scared? No, I said. I wasn't scared of staying in the cave, but I heard a mountain lion scream, and it scared me half to death. Aw, they won't bother you, Papa said. You had fire, didn't you? I said, yes. See, Papa taught him a lot of things he knew. That's why you got to listen to your dads, guys. He said, they'll never bother you unless they are wounded or cornered. But if they are, you had better look out. Papa asked me how I liked town. I said I didn't like it at all and wouldn't live there even if they gave it to me. Oh, goodness. With a querying look on his face, he said, I'm afraid I don't understand. I thought you always wanted to go to town. I did, I said, but I don't anymore. I don't like the people there and couldn't understand them. What was wrong with them, he asked. I told him how they had stared at me and even laughed and made fun of me. Oh, so now he's telling him all about those town people and how they were acting weird. He said, oh, I don't think they were making fun of you, were they? Yes, they were, I said. And to beat it all, the boys jumped on me and knocked me down in the dirt. If it hadn't been for the marshal, I would have taken a beating. Papa said, so you met the marshal. What did you think of him? I told him he was a nice guy. He bought me a bottle of soda pop. At the mention of soda pop, the blue eyes of my sisters opened wide. They started firing questions at me, wanting to know what color it was and what it tasted like. I told them it was strawberry and it bubbled and tickled when I drank it and it made me burp. So he's telling them all about soda because it was Billy's first time having soda and sisters had never had it either. So they were excited to hear about it. The eager questions of my three little sisters had an effect on my father and mother. Papa said, Billy, I don't want you to feel badly about the people in town. I don't think they were poking fun at you. Anyway, not like you think they were. Maybe they weren't, I said, but I still don't want to ever live in town. It's too crowded and you couldn't get a breath of fresh air. In a sober voice, my father said, someday you may have to live in town. Your mother and I don't intend to live in these hills all our lives. It's no place to raise a family. A man's children should have an education. They should get out there and see the world and meet people. So Dad is saying we're gonna have to go there eventually at some point. I don't see why we have to move to town to get an education, I said. Hasn't Mama taught us how to read and write? There's more to an education than reading and writing, Papa said. Much more. I asked him when he thought we'd be moving to town. Well, it'll be some time yet, he said. We don't have the money now, but I'm hoping someday we will. So his parents really wanted to move into town. But it seems like Billy had no interest in moving into town. From the stove where she was heating salt water for my feet, Mama said in a low voice, I'll pray every day and night for that day to come. I don't want you children to grow up without an education, not even knowing what a bottle of soda pop is, or ever seeing the inside of a schoolhouse. I don't think I could stand that. I'll just keep praying and someday the good Lord may answer my prayer. So Mama was getting sad thinking about that because she wants them to be able to go to a schoolhouse and and know what soda is and just kind of know things that people in town know. Even though seemed like all the kids were pretty happy just living in the hills. I told my mother I had seen the schoolhouse in town. Again, I had to answer 1,000 questions for my sisters. I told them it was made of brick red and was bigger than Grandpa's store, a lot bigger. There must have been at least 1,000 kids going to school there. I told all about the teeter-totters, the swings made out of log chains, the funny-looking pipe that ran up the side of the building, and how I had climbed up in it and slid out like the other kids. I didn't tell them how I came out. Remember how he came out? All wild and spread out and fell flat on his belly. So I think that was a fire escape, Papa said. Fire escape, I said. It looked like a slide to me. Did you notice where it made the bend up at the top? He asked. I nodded my head. Well, inside the school, there's a door, he said. If the school gets on fire, they open the door. The children jump in the pipe and slide out to safety. Oh, that's pretty cool. So that was the fire escape, to get the kids out in case there's a fire. Boy, that's a keen way of getting out of a fire, I said. That means a smart way. Well, it's getting late, Papa said. We'll talk about this some other time. We'd better go to bed as we have a lot of work to do tomorrow. My pups were put in the corn crib for the night. I covered them with shucks and kissed them good night. The next day was a busy one for me. With the hampering help of my sisters, I made the little dog house. Papa cut the ends off his check lines and gave them to me for collars. With painstaking care, deep in the tough leather, I scratched the name, Old Ann on one and Little Ann on the other. With a nail and a rock, 2 holes were punched in each end of the straps. I put them around their small necks and laced the ends together with baling wire. Okay, so he put them in the little corn crib so they can go to sleep. Papa said, we'll talk some more. We have a lot of work to do tomorrow. He went to go to sleep. And then the next day was really busy because they had to make a dog house. Billy had to make one with his sisters. He made them little collars, Little Ann and Old Ann. And then that evening I had a talk with my mother. I told her about praying for the 2 pups, about the magazine and the plans I had made. I told her how hard I tried to find names for them and how strange it was finding them carved in the bark of a sycamore tree. With a smile on her face, she asked, "Do you believe God heard your prayer and helped you?" "Yes, Mama," I said. "I know He did, and I'll always be thankful." Oh, that's so beautiful. I love that. You guys have to remember that God always helps us and always answers our prayers, even if it's not in the way we want Him to. God knows best what's best for us, okay? Just like He knew for Billy, He could have answered his prayers earlier, but He knew that this was the way that Billy was really going to take care and love and really cherish those pups if he worked hard for them. Okay, that's the end of chapter 6.